Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Just a few reminders before we get started. Tickets are available for our conference in May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois, 2025 at the Pure Marquette Lodge and Conference Center. For those who are new to the channel, who are just coming over here from X, we host a conference every year in Grafton, Illinois. This year will be the last year in Grafton, but the whole premise of the conference is to take all of our favorite people that we interview and bring them and give them an opportunity to present on stage to an audience. It sells out every year, and we're really looking forward to it. This is our fourth annual year, and you can find all that information and tickets at journeytotruth.online. So head over there. The link is below in the description. If you're interested, all the details are there. We'd love to see you come out and have fun with us. It's not just like a strict like a seminar or conference. It's more of a vacation getaway slash conference. We have bonfires every night, sky watches. Everybody just gets to hang out. There's lots of free time. So, um, yeah, take advantage of. Sorry, I'm just looking at the titles on our names. They changed the font. I'm like, oh, that's different. Must be something that Zoom's doing.
Oh yeah, they did. That's weird.
Oh, it just threw me off for a second. I was like, wait. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, that link is below in the description. And today we are joined by Tom Montalk. He is somebody I discovered on Twitter Spaces. I think Fringe was hosting, and you hopped in and you were like describing the difference in the categories of extraterrestrials, like extraterrestrials, interterrestrials, interdimensionals, all of them, and how we can decipher the difference. It's the first time I've ever actually heard anyone break down that
To that level.
descriptively,
To
yeah, to
that
that
level, at
level
least.
of
Yeah.
what the difference is. And because kind of, I don't think actually people understand the difference most of the time. So I would like to cover that at some point in the interview. And as far as I understand, you're an electrical engineer and a physicist on some level. So
Mhm.
I don't know much about your background. I have seen some of your interviews, but I'll turn it over to you and give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, yeah. So I was born in Germany, and I was German, but I'm in America now. So my mom, she's from Singapore. My dad's from Germany, and he's an electrical engineer too. So when I went to college, I did physics and electrical engineering. I double majored, but I only ended up doing 4 years because when I was working with all the graduate students, I saw the political environment that academia would entail if I went into it. I didn't want to jump through all those hoops, so I decided to leave college and do the rest of my physics and electrical engineering work privately, and also through like contract work and consulting and so on. So I've done that for quite a while, in addition to graphic design and web design, and that's why my website and other people that I've made websites for, I mean, they like the kind of work I do because I mean, I have an aesthetic eye in addition to my science, so and I do music on the side as well. So I've got the scientific side and I've got the music right brain side, and that sort of helps me deal with the paranormal issues, conspiracy research, and so on because it helps me tap both into my intuition as well as my more like critical thinking side of it. I should mention that when I was in Germany growing up, I did have a number of paranormal experiences, classic gray alien abductions. My mom, as well, she would wake up with giant bruises on her lap with puncture marks in them. Now, she didn't know about aliens at the time, and growing up in Singapore, which is a Asian culture, which is more superstitious, they believe in ghosts and demons and spirits and so on. So she thought it was my dead great grandmother, attacking her in the middle of the night for whatever reason. Enough so that she actually fled back to Singapore for 6 months trying to get away from these bruises that were happening almost on a nightly basis. And eventually they did kind of calm down, but I had my share of abduction experiences, and it was a very terrifying time period. And I was always talking to my grandma about the stone men or the gray men. In German, they call it the Steinemenschen or the Graue Menschen. That's what I called them. And I was deathly afraid of owls and anything that was white and bulbous, which is like a post-traumatic stress disorder after effect of having encounters with gray aliens. So when your memory gets suppressed after these abductions, there is still a subconscious fear PTSD remnant that remains, and that's sort of what I was expressing as a kid. But the fact that I had all these weird things, and I was also a very scientific and curious child, it kind of forced me to eventually start researching this topic in way more depth. So when I was 13 years old, I got a library card and I started reading all the UFO books, all the metaphysics books at my local library in Iowa at the time. This is after we had moved to America. And eventually I met a pen pal who was a retired nuclear Navy engineer. He used to be in the military back in the 60s, but he was also a conspiracy researcher. And he became my pen pal, and he would send me just boxes and boxes of books on all these topics. So this is when I was 15 years old. So I got like a major boost in my research, even in my teens. And so then by the time I went to college, that's when the internet really came into full force. So I was able to do tons of research there, and I was subscribing to all these physics journals, the leading edge research journal on truefacts.org. I read all the Matrix books, and just started networking with more and more people. And then so over the years, the past 10, 20 years, yeah, I've interacted with about 10 to 30,000 people online, getting their data, their insights, and just, trying to put it all together. And so that kind of brings me to today where I have like 3 books out. I've got a massive website with tons of free articles, a YouTube channel, and it's just a distillation of everything that I've put together over these years.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much there.
Amazing.
And it's funny when you said the term pen pal. Man, that's something I haven't heard in a long time,
Yeah.
pen pal.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder if
Same.
yeah, I wonder if I still have a pen pal. But yeah, so okay, I want to cover a lot. I want to get into some of what you just described there as far as your journey, but I also want to stay true to the title of this episode and just briefly touch on the drones and the
Mhm.
situation that we're seeing right now. And from your 40,000 foot view, what is your opinion on what's actually taking place?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that are taking place at the bottom of the pyramid of priorities, I guess you could say. But what's at the top of the pyramid? The top of the pyramid, it's not so much about what the drones themselves are doing right now. It is about why this is happening now. Like, what is this a prelude to? And the only thing that I can think of, well, there's 2 possibilities. One is the disclosure thing, which keeps on ramping up more and more with those congressional inquiries, right? Those
Mhm.
testimonies. That's on the acceleration curve. And at the same time, we also have an increase in the trend of approaching World War III, an actual nuclear confrontation with Russia and eventually China and North Korea. And well, the next on the agenda is Iran, like US versus Iran. So that's coming up. And usually in times past, historically with UFO flaps, a lot of times they did correlate with when there was a very heightened risk of a nuclear war outbreak, Cuban Missile Crisis, and various phases throughout the Cold War. And not to mention, the Manhattan Project that
Mm.
was in the 40s. And that's also when, during the time period when Kenneth Arnold had his flying saucer sighting, and that's when the UFO phenomenon really caught the attention of the public, and it became almost mass hysteria at the point. So once again, nowadays, we are at the point where geopolitical tensions are extremely high, and we're like this close. I don't want to say this close, but like this close to nuclear World War III or something like it. I mean, maybe it's not like nuclear bombs going off. Maybe it's EMP attacks or cyber attacks on American infrastructure and NATO and the Western, like European countries. And if that happens, there's a government commission that said if an EMP did hit America nationwide, 90% of the population would be dead within 1 year. And that's pretty serious, I mean, think about it. If you're an abductee, then if you're going to be part of that, wouldn't your abductors be worried about what you would be going through if you're considered their property or their subjects or something like that? So I do think that ETs have an interest, a vested interest in monitoring human events, especially when they start affecting things society-wide, like societal collapse, mass violence, war, things like that. That's usually when they get really interested and they watch the situation closely. So I think that's part of it. But I'm not going to say that all these drones are necessarily alien, okay? Because I do think that there are mixed phenomena that are simultaneously happening, okay? So one of those, if you remember back in, let's see in my notes, when was it? It was right. It was back in right around November 20th in the UK. Okay, in the UK there were various bases that were being used by the American Air Force, and they had major drone problems to where they had to scramble a counter drone team just to try to deal with that. Okay, so this is back November 20th. Then California, not too long ago, there was a Chinese national who was arrested for flying his drones over Vandenberg Air Force Base, taking pictures. So that's some sort of foreign espionage element there. Then in Germany, early December, Ramstein base, they had drone issues. Also, a liquid natural gas facility in Germany was also being drone surveilled. Rheinmetall, it's like a German industrial manufacturer of military equipment. They're getting drone issues, and also BASF, which is a chemical industrial powerhouse of German origin. that also was getting drone issues. So at least early on, a lot of these drone incidences seem to be involving some sort of surveillance by a foreign adversary. It could have been alien, it could have been alien, but it could also have been advanced Russian stuff, or could have even been like American Black Ops doing security testing on their own facilities to see how the lower, more public layers of the military responded to something like that. Kind of like a test drill for some future event where Russia could do some sort of a surveillance issue. So that's like the more like military foreign adversary surveillance aspect of it. That's one aspect. Another aspect that you have too is you also have the potential for secret military drones being used, like secret government programs happening. And I think that probably constitutes the bulk of what's actually going on. Because some of the more recent reports, in, for example, the Ocean County Sheriff's Department, they had one of their officers see that there were like 50 drones coming in off the ocean, not out of the water, but just off the ocean from the ocean direction, like east. And they had a Coast Guard vessel go out there to investigate, and the Coast Guard vessel saw 13 drones with 8-foot wingspans, also in the area. So there's something off the coast that is launching those particular drones. And I think that's more likely to be a secret military operation or a paramilitary, like Palantir, some sort of non-governmental organization that works with the government for some secret projects. Now, what that could actually be for, I don't know. I don't know if it's testing, psychological operations, or if it is an actual security issue like counterterrorism. There's different theories that have been out there, like the idea that a lot of these drones are they're nuclear radiation detectors, whether detecting gamma rays, was it neutrons or tritium in the atmosphere. And I don't want to get too much into the details of that, but there's different ranges that these different kinds of detectors need to be within to be able to detect something. And a lot of these drones are actually beyond that range. They're too far up to account for some of that. So I think that theory is could be, but might be something else going on. They might have black ops technology that is more sensitive to radiation than what we know about, so therefore they could be farther away. That's another possibility. So I do think there's some sort of secret government thing going on, and I think Trump just today said that he knows that the government knows what they are and where they're coming from, where they're taking off, and where they're landing. And that to me sounds more like a non-public military security operation than an actual alien thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Go
go.
ahead.
Oh, well, I did see that what Trump said, and I have heard that this whole thing where they're trying to sniff out the nukes because the deep state was planning a false flag
Or,
attack to
or
stop him
dirty
from
dirty bombs, which is different
30.
than a normal nuke, but
Right.
similar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, okay, they're trying to sniff out the dirty bombs in attempt to like thwart this transition of power before the inauguration and all this stuff. Now, what's interesting, it was in Trump's statement, if you listen at the end, I forgot even what specific area he was mentioning, but he was like, I won't be staying there this weekend. And he goes, I've changed my plans. I won't be staying there this weekend. Almost like as comms to whoever, like maybe he was tipped off that there was another attempt was going to occur in that specific area, and he made it very clear. I thought it was interesting, like he made it clear that he changed his plans and won't be staying there.
Mm.
So there could be like this could be very much political as well. I mean, like it's probably layered. And we just had Maureen Richmond on our last X Spaces, who is an astrologer, and astrologically, through her monitoring the patterns of UFO flaps over time, astrological alignments. Right now, we're in an expansion point where we would absolutely expect a significant event like this, and it's happening. So, I mean, there's basically you laid it out beautifully. All of the above is possible. But what are your thoughts on this? Thwarting the transition of power and trying to
Yeah.
stop that.
Well, I mean, right now it's December 16th. The inauguration is, we have a month. We basically have a month to go. So if they're going to try anything, it would have to be during this next month. So it would make sense that security is super heightened right now. Now, I mean, dirty bombs, some sort of a nuke thing. I mean, it's like the movie Sum of All Fears, where they were trying to do a false flag nuclear attack just so they could create war with Russia. I mean, that's the situation we basically find ourselves in nowadays. So the movie
Right.
was kind of prescient about that. So I do think that's very possible. And but unfortunately, a lot of these videos that are out of these drones, my personal opinion, just being familiar with telescopes and binoculars and the way optics work and airplanes and so on, I do think that like 95% of these videos are probably mistaken You know, because I mean, because each one, I mean, right now, if we had the time, I could go through each one and point out like why I think this is not necessarily an ET craft necessarily. You know, it could be some of these are airplanes. I remember some that are Starlink satellites. There was that ABC News video of that fuzzy orb thing that was kind of undulating. Well, I mean, based on the sky, based on the fact that it's not flickering, it wasn't a star because stars twinkle, and it was daylight out. So therefore, if it was something, it was probably Venus out of focus. And if it's out of focus, and you've got these atmospheric refraction effects that cause it to undulate. So, you know, there's different physical explanations for a lot of these. However, I do think that there's a like a 1%, maybe 5% trace amongst all these that is actual like true alien activity. And that is something that, and the way that those behave is very similar to the Tic Tac incident from 2004 with the Nimitz encounter off the coast of San Diego, where you had an anomalous object that was huge. It wasn't like the size of a car. I mean, that one was the size of a bus. Okay, it was huge, and it was like a white Tic Tac shape, and it moved at impossible velocities, impossible accelerations. And that is not something that you see with these current drones being reported. I mean, there are some anomalies, like for example, when the police in New Jersey sent up the drone, he said that they said that they didn't have heat signatures and that they were easily evading those drones. Now that could be black ops technology because obviously if you're going to have some advanced technology to surveil the enemy, you can't have heat signatures coming off of it. So they probably have some advanced shielding technology. But typically UFOs don't, or like alien UFOs, they don't have wings. There are claims that they can do mimicry, and that's true. You know, they can mimic airplanes. I know people who have seen anomalous things that tried to look like airplanes, but they weren't airplanes, and they would disappear in a bright
Yep.
blue sky, right? But the thing is, if something is going to be mimicking something, in order to claim that it is mimicking, there has to be something off about it that you can point to and say, you know what, you tried to be an airplane, but you didn't move in the right way. Like you went backwards, or you know, you were rotated in a way instantly that an airplane can't. And most of these things that I've seen in the video don't exhibit any anomalous behavior that would indicate it being something other than a man-made drone, a rocket, a plane, or something like that. Okay, so I do think that there's an alien component to it. It's just that a lot of these videos don't show it. So I'm skeptical about a lot of it, but I'm not dismissing the entire phenomenon because, as you said, it's a multi-layered thing. There's a foreign surveillance aspect. There's probably secret government program. There's a little trace of the alien stuff, and then the rest of it, I think, is just people being mistaken about a lot of it. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I agree. I mean,
Yeah, I completely agree as well. It's
there,
multi-layered.
and the thing is too, some of the videos that we're watching are from like 3 years ago.
Yep.
People are just sharing shit. I was clicking on one. I'm like, oh, this is wild. And then I saw the date. And then so I started paying attention to the dates and the source of these videos. And one of them was somebody posted a video from a movie set in like New
Mhm.
York or something. Some movie they were filming where it looked like the street was destroyed. So a lot of this is I don't know if it's like intentional disinformation campaigns, people just trying to, get clicks and likes or whatever, because, X is monetized now. So everyone, they don't care what they put out as long as they're
Right.
getting, the trending, the action. So, there's a lot going on that,
I Well,
go
real
ahead,
quick,
Ed.
I just saw some with my own eyes last night, for about at least 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes. We were alerted by a friend of ours that saw him in the sky. So we're in the Boston area. We're in like the north suburbs of Boston. And he was like, "Go outside. There's drones." We went outside. First we saw one, then we saw two, then we saw a third one. Then we end up seeing over 20 of these things.
Mm.
And they were not airplanes. They were not anything normal. And they were hovering like at a slow, steady pace, but they looked like a TR3B, like a triangle shape.
Mhm.
That's what it looked like to me. And but they all had lights, and then one light was like flashing on all of them. But it wasn't like the normal plane flashing lights. It was
Yeah,
completely different. And they were
yeah.
triangular shaped hovering drones. And there had been at least 20, maybe 25
Mm. Yeah,
these
that's
things that we saw.
interesting.
I have some video, and we all got our own videos of it. So
Yeah,
I
that's
have seen
pretty
them with
cool.
my own eyes now.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because some of those secret government vehicles they're like semi-fixed wing because they can collapse their wings and hover, or they can expand their wings and fly like a fixed wing drone for greater range. And the thing is, they could turn off their lights if they wanted to, but FAA regulations demand that you have to have the lights on. And if you don't have the lights on, then you have to notify the FAA so that they can clear the airspace. Because I mean, they don't want to risk any collisions, especially with something with
Right.
an 8-foot wingspan.
Right.
And then if you notify the FAA and they put out that thing, then that gives it away even more that there's something funny
Right.
going on. So I think that's probably why, if they are some secret military thing, they are leaving the lights on. So hey, it's within
Right.
regulations. They don't have to explain themselves. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, I'd like to move on, because we could just beat
Yeah.
this dead horse all day. It's we everyone's been talking
Speculate
about
all day on what we think is going on. There's
exactly,
something
but
going on that they don't want us. They're not telling us. The government is not telling us.
yeah,
And I'm sure there's layers. It's all need to know, right? So somebody at the top of this pyramid knows what's going on, but the lower levels of the government might not even know at all. So they can't tell us.
Mhm.
yeah,
In the
that's a great
military, same thing, right?
that's a great point. Yeah, and I think it's wise to just consider multiple sources, and don't just marry yourself to one idea. I see a lot of people that have already made up their mind. They know matter of factly what it is. I think it's healthier to just take a stand back and observe. So
Right.
um, we put time travel in the title because you did your interview with Ashton Forbes recently, and time travel came up, and you were mentioning the time travelers potentially manipulating our history, and this going all the way back to ancient times, and just the just the possibility that time travel is that prevalent and it plays a bigger role than we think. And I mean, the information, in my opinion, is out there. It's ready to be found, but not everyone has found that information, or that information hasn't found them about the existence of time travel. And I would like to get your opinion on what you think, what this temporal war looks like,
Mhm.
because that's what it is.
Yeah, I do think that there's something to it for sure. But then again, it's difficult to distinguish between beings that have very, very good remote viewing and precognition abilities to see the future and therefore to be able to steer the future. That's very similar to someone actually coming from the future, knowing the past and trying to change it. Because like one is looking from the past towards the future with like perfect vision, and the other one's looking from the future to the past with perfect hindsight. So how do you tell the difference? And honestly, I don't think we are necessarily able to always tell the difference because from some of the UFO abduction research that I've looked into, especially people who've had personal contacts, like contactees, their alien handlers, they have the ability to see things weeks, if not years, into the future. It depends on the probability of it. So the more set in stone something is, the more in advance it can be seen, the more clear, like the more clearly it's in focus. So if something's really like faint and up in the air, then maybe you can only see it 3 days out. But a major like collective event, some sort of mass disaster or something, they can see that years in advance. And perhaps that would explain why UFO activity has picked up so much since the 1940s. Maybe it's not just our own technological advancement, but maybe it's also what's coming up, let's say even 100 years later, which would be 2040s. So imagine there's something coming up within the next 20, 30 years that has been known about for almost a century now. And these beings having future vision or coming from the future, they know about it. And so they decide to come back here in order to kind of set the stage for influencing that chaos and to influence what comes out of it politically, maybe even what comes out of it genetically. Maybe some of these abductees that are being used to breed hybrids, maybe they're trying to re-engineer the human gene pool to insert their own genetics into it for various reasons. I mean, we can get into that too, the speculation on that. But the thing is, if we do have time travelers here, okay, if we do have time travelers here, the important thing to know is that the future isn't singular. So there isn't just one future. There are actually multiple probable futures. So if we have time travel, we probably have time travelers coming here from different probable futures. And if they're
Right.
all coming back towards their common past, then it ends up being like a game of musical chairs where there's only one future that we ourselves will ultimately end up in, and they're trying to decide which one that is. So there would actually be a time war going on between different probable futures if that were to be the case.
Yeah.
So that's one point. The other point to recognize is that within physics, okay, especially general and well, relativity in general, there's the idea of what are called closed time-like curves. And it's just a fancy term for time loops. Seen like in time travel movies where you try to go back to change the past, but you inadvertently end up creating the very past that you came from. So you end up creating like a self-fulfilling prophecy, it's like a time loop. I mean, that's
Hmm.
like a trope. That's like a trope that's played out in all these time travel movies and
Right.
shows. So that's a closed time like curve where you try to go into the past to change it, but you end up creating the very past that you came from. So it's just one loop, it's like one loop that's self-reinforcing, like an Ouroboros. It's like a, self-reinforcing time loop. But you see, that's not the only kind of time travel possible, because you can also have what I would call, instead of closed time-like curves, you can have open space-like curves. And what that means is you can have multiple probable futures that aren't set in stone coming back and interacting with multiple probable pasts that all sort of cluster together and then diverge again into these different futures. And so then you end up with a real cluster, a cluster of a time war going on between probable past, probable futures. And the thing about it is, so this is kind of technical, but I have to explain it. So within physics, especially quantum physics, there's this factor called quantum phase. Okay, quantum phase. And what quantum phase is, it's kind of like the dial of a radio that tunes you into different stations. And each station is a particular timeline. So right now, you and me and your audience, we're all locked into the same quantum phase of being here within this space-time universe and this timeline. And that's why we're able to, I can speak, my voice turns electrical signals, you hear it, you respond, right? So it's like a two-way lock between you and me. We're all in the same reality right now, essentially. Okay. But the thing is, an alien right now that is monitoring this conversation, it might not actually be locked into this reality to the extent that we are. Its quantum phase might be just a little bit off, just a little bit to the side where it's fuzzy. Okay, so we are fuzzy to it, it's fuzzy to us, and for that reason, it's invisible and we can't see it. But it might be standing right here behind me, like looking over my shoulder right now, and I can't sense it unless I were psychic or unless I'm like a cat or something that has abilities. And cats and animals and kids, they can see these invisible things. But the thing is, the reason why I mention this is because these different multiple probable futures, they all have different quantum phase. And so therefore, when they come back here to try to interact with us, they're not fully 100% locked into the reality that we are in. And so they have to operate by certain quantum principles. Like, for example, if I want to interact with you, but I only have a little bit of quantum phase lock, maybe I can only interact with you physically for 5 minutes at a time before I have to, like, before we break our connection. Or maybe if I'm around you, I can only be 5% physical to you. So I'd be invisible, but I can still influence your emotions telepathically. I can still watch what you do. I can still like arrange little improbabilities or something in your path. And so what I'm trying to say is, instead of me being able to 100% physically interact with you, maybe I can only 5% interact with you. And that sort of ambiguity leads to a lot of weirdness that we do see within the alien abduction UFO phenomenon, where they seem very, very evasive, very sneaky, like, always pussyfooting around. Well, it's not just for operational security. I think it's also because they are operating from outside of our linear timeline, and they're trying to interact with us in a way that is not, that they're blocked by certain quantum laws. So that, I think that's why they have to operate within plausible deniability. I think that's why they can abduct a person, but only if they erase their memories afterwards, because there's the plausible deniability, the thing about not knowing whether something is or isn't, that actually is explained by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where, like, for example, within the double slit experiment in quantum physics, if
Mhm.
you're not observing the experiment, you get the quantum effects, right? But if you observe the experiment, then you don't get those quantum effects. You just get the regular reality that we know, like classical
Right.
non-quantum physics. So if these are quantum beings, if they are operating by quantum laws, then they have to stay within that quantum state in order to do a lot of the things that they do. And so therefore they would have to operate within our blind spots, our blind spot of, we're not really sure if they exist or not. We're not sure if I really had an abduction or not. Okay, I've got the bruises on me, but it could have been something else. See, there's always this plausible deniability, no matter what it is. And the degree of plausible deniability required is proportional to how little that phase lock is. So if we don't have quantum phase lock at all, then you can barely interact with someone. But if it's 100%, then I can do whatever I want to. I could punch you in the shoulder or whatever, and you would feel it because we're in the same reality. So this is not something that you normally hear about within ufology, this idea of aliens being quantum beings. But a lot of the data that's involved there indicates that yes, they do have mastery over space-time to some degree. Like the inside of their ships is bigger than the outside because they can compress space. They have that ability. They seem to be able to kind of go outside time. They can remote view the future, or maybe they're time travelers from the future. So that, so earlier when you mentioned those different levels of alien types those different
Right.
classifications, this gets into one of those, and we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I do want to make a comment before that. So, are you familiar with the Sands of Time series by Sean David Morton?
Yeah.
It kind of breaks down the origins of time travel within the shadow government and how we've already like perfected this technology as humans, thanks to things like the Nazi Bell and the Philadelphia
Mhm.
experiment. And, they call it dimensional shift technology. And, they even describe the traditional UFO, like the Bob Lazar sports model, being essentially a time machine because these things aren't using advanced propulsion as our physics would understand it. They're essentially warping and manipulating time and dimensionally shifting and traveling in another dimension and breaking all the laws of physics and time as we understand it. And that's one of the things that they learned the hard way because these guys would be come back with temporal disorientation and are temporally disoriented, and they would have like long-term detrimental health effects that would have, effectively shortened their lifespan. So it's been, it was a struggle early on. It wasn't just a matter of like reverse engineering this advanced propulsion, zero point energy. We're talking about something that potentially is even beyond what we can understand, and it's been described that, all physics is based on an assumed truth to begin with. So,
Mhm.
with that in mind, we have to understand that anything is possible, and potentially, like the term you use, like our physics, our education has been intentionally handicapped to keep us hitting these dead ends, right? So
Right.
I so considering that the UFOs themselves are time machines, and like we're dealing with nothing but time travel essentially when we're talking about extraterrestrial vehicles and even our own government, whenever you break those laws of physics and dimensionally shift and appear in one location, from here to the moon in an instant, what is happening? Like you are manipulating time. So there's a lot to consider, I think, whenever we're talking about this stuff and how these corporations within the private sector have used and abused this technology and the way it's described in those books is when they were experimenting with it, they were creating dimensional tears in our space time. And the early UFO flaps, it wasn't UFOs from space. They were slipping in through other dimensions. They would call them dimensional invaders or whatever they would call them. And they were trying to create a frequency net to patch up those holes. This is all according to the Sands of Time material, which I do believe is based in a lot of truth. So, I mean, if maybe you wanted to comment on that before we
Mhm.
get into these extraterrestrials.
Yeah, yeah, right. So even just looking at mainstream physics and the path that it took, I'm looking back on it right now in my mind. So I would say between 1890 and 1920, during that 30-year time span, that is when anti-gravity, invisibility, and time travel would have become possible. Just looking at it, because I sort of talked about this on Ashton Forbes' show, so I don't have to go into all of it here. But the theory of electromagnetism, just to give an example, James Maxwell, when he developed that theory in the 1860s, well, that theory, it already included a doorway to anti-gravity, to manipulating space-time, but he decided not to go down that road. He got really close to it and he said, well, but the ether, as far as we know, it's not elastic, so you can't really stretch it and rip. Well, he didn't say like rip open holes in it, but that's what he was implying. And then so we're just not going to go there. So he never went there. But the thing is, other people did. And they had since that time another 20 years, 30 years until the 1890s before they really started applying it. And once you had like Tesla with his AC generators, at that point you had enough power to produce the electricity and currents that you need in order to rip open these portals in space-time. And so you can use conventional technology in unconventional ways using these expanded hidden physics, these aspects of physics that are hidden from the mainstream in order to manipulate space, time, and so on. So the thing is, if humans can do it, then of course aliens can do it, whatever they actually are. Uh, and that's another reason why for people to say that aliens are nothing but discarnate demons pretending to be aliens. I mean, there is that element, but to say that it's all that, it doesn't really fit because the thing is, we ourselves, using our unconventional technologies, we can do invisibility. We can go through solid walls, like the Philadelphia experiment of the 1940s. Okay, I think it
Mhm.
was like 1943 or something. The Philadelphia experiment where they modified a U.S. naval ship in order to they had coils around it and they rotated the magnetic field in a certain way in order to warp space and time, and supposedly the ship teleported
Yeah.
a great
Yeah.
distance and then came back. And when it came back, some of the sailors were embedded in the walls of the ship. It's almost like they had phased through solid matter and they were
Right.
stuck in there. And then the other ones that weren't, and they came out, some of them went crazy. Some of them burst into flames because, well, there's reasons for that. It's because they weren't synchronized with our time rate, and time has to do with energy. So you get these sudden influxes of energy from space time. It's kind of complicated. But the thing is, it all kind of fits. And so that was in the 1940s. So you can imagine with it being like almost 100 years later, what kind of technology they have now. I mean, they've perfected it.
Yeah.
You know, maybe
Right.
maybe not as much as aliens have, because here's the thing. If you rip a portal in space-time and you go out into hyperspace, then how do you navigate that hyperspace? You can't just like steer, as you would a car or an airplane. There's no like air to like, move you around. You
Yeah.
have to steer with consciousness.
Yeah.
And so the more consciously sophisticated you are, the more you can navigate within hyperspace. And aliens have a natural superior psychic ability than humans do, and they have faster brains because they genetically modify themselves to be, way smarter than we are. So they would have still superiority within the domain of hyperspace than we would do with our technology. So what I'm trying to say is, even though there's advanced technology, there is still a conscious component to it that needs to also be sophisticated in order to make the maximum use of it, and that is what gives aliens still superior power over even our own Black Ops. So
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
and to add to your point about the Philadelphia experiment, whenever they're essentially traversing time, they call it molecular dissociation. Like your entire physical body is dissociating and then re-merging, reforming whenever it makes a jump, and whenever it reforms and phases back into wherever reality or timeline you're jumping to, that's whenever it blended in with the ship and the furniture and the walls and stuff. And they say that happened due to lack of a psychic navigator because they didn't know where they were going. They call it a psychic navigator. And I happened to be recently, I stayed with this man in Sedona. He's 85 years old, and he's a quantum physicist who worked 40 years in the shadow government reverse engineering UFO technology. And he was brought in long time ago after the Philadelphia experiment to perfect this, what he told me, dimensional shift technology. He said it was the size of a room, for lack of a better, example, in the USS Eldridge. And by the time he left the program, he said it was the size of a cell phone or a credit card. He said it was the size of a credit card. And it's a dimensional shift technology that the human can carry on their person and literally shift, teleport, shift out of this reality and go to the moon, wherever. There was no limits, he said. He goes, the only reason that it would take us 3 months to get to Mars is because that our belief system would limit us to 3 months. He said, if you understand what we're truly capable of, you can be there in any location, in any coordinate, in an instant. And this is coming from a quantum physicist who claims to have, and then he had an answer for every question. Like he was definitely involved in these programs. So, and he won't talk on camera. He won't publicly come forward, because he still has access to a lot of information and access to the underground network, which he told me all about. But so we're talking about if he's not lying, if he's being truthful, then I mean, we have no idea what we're actually capable of. And that's just his knowledge,
Mhm.
right? That's his perspective from what he's seen and been involved with. So it's just something to consider. Like we can do a lot more than we even understand.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the reason why that is because reality fundamentally is consciousness. It is actually a consciousness field
Yeah.
that we, as our own consciousnesses, are existing within. I mean, we're like little eddies in an ocean. You know, we're made of water, but we're our own separate structures, but we're still made of water, right? So we're like these structures within a greater field of consciousness, and so it is the programming of consciousness, that field of consciousness, that creates physics as we know it,
Right.
and our own beliefs do play a big part of it. But there's also, I think, a kind of universal subconscious that holds the majority of physics in place. And if you can overcome that as well, if you can break that machine, then you can break physics that it is enforcing. So, it's a co-creative process between our own consciousness and that. Now, the thing is, even in our own lives right now, you can experiment with synchronicities. You can experiment with manifesting, using your own conscious intention to create synchronistic opportunities and attract things into yourself in life. And if you do that enough, you convince yourself that, okay, some part of my consciousness does have some degree of control over reality. Now, what does that say? Well, that right there disproves most of the physics skeptics that are out there that say, oh no, the universe is its own cold machine and consciousness is just a product of that cold machine. We're just an epiphenomenon of it. Well, no, you can disprove that easily just by doing some manifesting experiments. So I think reality is fundamentally conscious. And either you play by the rules of that universal subconscious, which the ancients would call the Demiurge. Either you play by its rules and you use physics principles to engineer machines that can, break space-time and allow for time travel and everything like that, or you override those rules by transcending it and using just your consciousness to kind of go beyond physics itself. And
Yep.
that's how you can like teleport. And so there are these higher beings, which I'll talk about momentarily, that they have achieved that level of conscious control, and so they don't need UFOs to travel. They don't need machines to open portals and do all this kind of stuff because those things those are all happening within the narrative or the narrative of the fiction that we exist within, which is that this is a solid reality, and we are just it's just like a law of the jungle, dog eat dog kind of thing, where we are just subject to the whims of a cold deterministic machine.
Right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and that so that guy, that quantum physicist, what he told me he did was tasked with doing was training him and his team. Um, they were all quantum physicists. They were brought in because of their IQs and their test scores and stuff. And he explained to me how he was even brought into these shadow programs. I forgot what he called them, but they were tasked with training with the Aboriginals in Africa, Australia, and Easter Island. And he said he had to spend 9 months with each group until he could learn how to physically teleport his body, until all of them could physically teleport their body like the Aboriginals already know how to do. This is something they innately know how to do. And he explained to me what it was like living amongst these tribes. And he goes, they can phase in and out just like a Sasquatch.
Mhm.
Like these people, they already have, they've never lost that ability, right?
Mhm.
We've lost that ability, but they had to train with them. And the reason they wanted these guys to be able to teleport their physical body is because they were recovering these UFOs that they couldn't get inside of. There was no doors. So
Mhm.
they literally wanted these guys to teleport inside the craft, and they were successful, according to what he told me. But it was important. He brought up the Philadelphia experiment as an example because he said if you don't, he goes, the first step to teleporting is remote viewing, and remote viewing in itself is time travel. And he said you have to become such a good remote viewer to see where you're going, because if you don't know where you're going, if you can't psychically navigate your jump, then you could end up inside of a rock or inside of a solid object when you
Just like
phase
the
in,
Philadelphia.
just like the
Mhm.
Philadelphia experiment. So
Mhm.
first and foremost, before you can even attempt to teleport, you have to perfect and master remote viewing. And it's just something we don't really think about. But he was saying, like, matter of factly, that there are people on this planet that can do that, that have the ability, including the Aboriginals.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally believe it because, as you mentioned, Sasquatch, the way that a lot of Bigfoot encounters go, these things seem to phase in and out of our reality. So
Mhm.
that's why, I mean, it's not like they're just as these apes living in the forest. No, I mean, they kind of come here and then they can phase out as well. And there are historical reports of regular, well, not regular humans, but humans like us developing the ability to bilocate, to
Mhm.
teleport, to
Yeah,
Yep.
levitate, right? So,
Yep.
hey, humans have done it, so it's not out of the possibility for Bigfoot to do it or these Aborigines. I mean, they're humans too, but I mean, I'm saying there's just other things that can do the same thing, and they've probably taken it to a much higher art than we have accidentally throughout history.
yeah. So, okay, let's
But yeah.
talk about, before we get into the tiers of these extraterrestrials. And Aaron, did you have any questions before we move on?
No, no, but like you said, it's already in our documented ancient history. Like many yogis and masters and stuff have defied physics and teleported and levitated and pushed their hand into a rock and make a handprint and footprint and stuff like that. So clearly, there's tons of proof that you can defy the laws of physics by your
Mhm.
own consciousness.
Yeah.
And then we see the Sasquatch doing it, and like you said, they're not just these primitive apes. They're actually advanced beings that have been on the planet for a really long time. They're kind of been hiding as protection, until we get to a point where they're safely able to come out amongst us, which we're moving into, and amongst other ET races. I
Mhm.
do believe it will be happening, and I believe we're kind of in this phase of getting prepared for that right now, along with the war going on as well.
Right, right. Yeah, well said.
Thank
So
you.
I want to I want to help our audience understand how this technology that we're discussing is used for my lab abductions. I know this is something you briefly touched on in, other interviews, but whenever they allegedly they have the ability to abduct our consciousness during a REM state of sleep, put it into a clone body and perform a mission in another reality, another timeline, even in this timeline, and then put back, and then you wake up in the morning and you don't know any better unless you get bleed through, which does occur, and that's how we even learned about it. So maybe you can explain your understanding of the possibility of that and how that's actually being accomplished.
Yeah, so from the MyLab abduction accounts that I've seen and also what I personally experienced, because I'm not just an alien abductee, I've also had MyLab stuff as well. There are basically two methods. Well, okay, so there are like three methods that they could use to bring you to their underground base. One method is the actual just plain old physical abduction, and that requires like a van or a truck or a helicopter or something to literally physically take you, like armed guards and everything, armed guards taking you out. But that's like a really primitive method. That's almost barely never used unless you just happen to be so close to a base that they don't even bother with the whole teleportation technology. So the physical method is one. The other method is literally opening up a portal in your bedroom, like one of your walls literally turns into a portal, and there's the base on the other side of it, and they take you through. That's another one. And then the third one is a more direct form of teleportation. That's more similar to like Star Trek teleportation, where there's like an energy field that goes through you, and I wouldn't say you demolecularize, but you maybe get shifted out of the space time and then shifted over and then kind of shifted back in. So that sort of a thing. But I mean, they're all kind of similar. Um, and that's easy to do because if you think about it, as you said, it's almost like time travel. It's almost like remote viewing. Because so what you're doing with remote viewing when you're remote viewing to that extent is you're capturing the vibrational essence of the remote point, like its key signature, its coordinates within consciousness space, and then those coordinates then are what allow you to teleport to that area. So you can kind of use that in reverse to bring a remote object to you as well. If you lock into its signature and then you kind of shift it out and then move it towards you. So I think that's all they're doing. I think they're locking onto you and then bringing you to that new consciousness coordinate system, which is their underground base.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was very well explained. So
Yeah.
you've said this has happened to you, like your my lab experiences. Would you like to share any of those stories, or is that something you're not comfortable talking
Well,
about?
the thing is, I've never done hypnotic regression. So my memories, my conscious memories only go up to a certain point. And so actually 90% of what I have is the after effects and the pre effects of it. Because the thing is, okay, so both the MyLab, the military abductions and the alien abductions, both of them mess with your memory and they can suppress your memory. And the older that you get, especially if you're not a child anymore, the more hardened or crystallized your mind becomes, like it's less plastic, and so it's easier to crack and cleave into and go into another compartment that you can't access from your regular conscious state. So the thing is, I remember my childhood alien abductions up to a point, but the older I got, the harder it was to remember any of it. But I knew that they were still happening because of the after effects, like bruises and um, laser cuts, weird like scratches and stuff, all over the body, and PTSD symptoms. And our cat would be frazzled, and something happened, the night before. So some of these MyLab things, I remember being like in an underground base that looked almost like an abandoned subway station. But I could tell it wasn't like a public subway station. It's more like an underground base like station where you get loaded onto a maglev train or something and you get sent off through a tunnel. Like I remember being in one of those and being led around in a group by a military guy with a weird flashlight thing that would flash in a certain pattern. It would kind of shift your state of consciousness. It's like a weird MK Ultra programming thing. And later, funny enough, I found that exact same flashlight through a Google search.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it was like a looked like a spotlight with a curly cord on it that went to a battery pack on the hip that you wear on the hip. So I found the exact same thing, and but I had no idea that those things even existed prior to me finding it. So I looked it up only because of that, so-called dream that I had. So I think there could have been something to that. But I'm not like one of those really intense my labs that remembers a lot of the experiences and goes on these shows and gets to talk about it. So I only have little glimpses here and there. And so that's why I don't really talk about it too much because I don't have as much as what some of these other more involved my lab people do.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, because it's honest, and I even think like I've done regressions before, and I don't even share the stuff that has come through my regressions because it's still hard for me to wrap my head around. Like, I don't know, like if it's not a solid conscious memory that I'm confident that I know happened, then I'll share that publicly. But when it comes to a regression, like, okay, even though that came out of my own mouth, it's still, I don't technically remember it. It came through the session, but it's not a memory, if that makes sense. So I still, I'm reserved when I talk about it, and I appreciate that, you know, because it's healthy, and we don't want to muddy the waters with, you know, things that aren't happening. So um, okay, I guess this would be a good time to segue into the different categories of extraterrestrials. And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even, you probably know more of them than I do. So maybe you can just, you know, start from the bottom and build, you know, build your way up and help our audience understand and us understand how you would classify these and how they all fit in with each other.
So back in the 40s and 50s, when the UFO thing really broke into mass consciousness, people thought that they were spacemen, that they were people just like us that came from other planets and just more advanced spacecrafts. And that was called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Extraterrestrial meaning beyond Earth. So that was the prevailing assumption for many decades at the time. However, as time went on, people like Jacques Vallée and John Keel and others who really started digging into this, they found that a lot of these UFO experiences, these contacts with supposed aliens, they included a lot of what they called high strangeness. In other words, they didn't fit the typical mold of what you would expect of a spaceman in a physical vehicle. There was more almost like paranormal, occult aspects to it, almost like consciousness was more part of the equation. And I think what they were picking up on is I think they were picking up on the quantum nature of some of these beings, that they weren't 100% physical like us, but they're sort of beyond, and they're able to shift between space times, and they didn't have the perfect quantum lock on us, you know, so things were getting kind of weird. So I think they're picking up on that, but the extraterrestrial thing. So extraterrestrials, that would be the lowest category of this hierarchy that I'm talking about. Okay, so extraterrestrials just means 100% physical, just like us. You know, I mean, if we went 500 years in the future and we looked at humans and they had space travel and maybe a little bit more psychic abilities. I mean, that's basically what these ETs would be in the old extraterrestrial hypothesis assumption, and they would have more advanced technology. They'd be more intelligent. They might, like as I mentioned, they might have some psychic powers, but they would still be physical, and they would still use conventional technology that we could understand with our current physics if we just took it a little bit further. Okay, you know, so that's what ETs are. But the thing is, a lot of aliens are not. They don't fit within that mold. And why? Well, it's because they can phase through walls. They have that quantum property that somehow depends on our own free will and plausible deniability factor, you know, the whole quantum observer effect and Heisenberg uncertainty principle. They seem to be a little bit beyond linear time, maybe coming from different probable futures or from alternate realities. And so once we start talking about those classes of beings, instead of just being extraterrestrial, I call these things ambi-terrestrial, ambi as in amphibious, like in between two different realms. And the reason why I say that is because they seem to have the ability to adjust their degree of physicality as we would measure it. So phasing into our reality, phasing out of our reality. But in either place, they're still like physical. It's just they're not physical to us anymore because now they're on like a different radio station. Okay.
Right.
Right. So it's not extraterrestrial anymore. It's this weird quantum thing, and that's what I call ambi-terrestrial. And I think the majority of aliens would fit within that realm. Because the thing is, once you develop your conscious powers and your technology, at some point you're going to override the regular laws of physics, and you're going to become native to what is beyond that. You can become native to hyperspace or to some other realm or something like that. You're not going to be limited to just one space time, one linear timeline as we are, and as regular ETs would be. Okay. So that's ambi-terrestrials. Now, if you go even further than that, then you wouldn't even need technology anymore because you could just use your conscious powers to do everything. And that's what I call ultra terrestrials. Now, that's a term that has been used, but it hasn't really been used with an agreed upon definition, you know, because some people use these terms interchangeably, like, oh, interdimensional means ultra terrestrial, it means whatever. But I kind of differentiate between these. So, ultra terrestrial to me, it means having conscious mastery over matter, energy, space, and time to where you don't need technology anymore and you just use your own consciousness to do things, to travel, to you can materialize ships if you want to, but you don't really need to. You can depending on how powerful you are as an ultra terrestrial, you could materialize for yourself a physical human body and walk amongst us, you know, humans in society, unbeknownst to anyone around them. you know. So like historically, like supposed encounters with, let's say, angels. Okay, so people that believe they've had encounters with actual, true, bona fide angels, those angels might show up in the guise of a homeless person or a child or someone unassuming. Okay, and but then the thing is, if the person looks back, all of a sudden that person is gone. So these people can appear and disappear. And during the contact, they might say something that ends up being very instrumental to that person's spiritual path. So there's like a enlightened push to the presence. And so that's like a positive ultra terrestrial. Okay. That's something that natively exists as an energy being, but that can materialize a physical body here when it needs to in order to enact a positive divine type agenda. Okay. So that's like a positive ultra terrestrial. But the thing is, there are also negative ultra terrestrials, and they are extremely dark beings that have the ability to also project themselves here physically, but they're more limited for different reasons. And those are, I guess, what the Gnostics would call the archons. So archons, there's different ways of defining it. I know Jay Weidner, he defines them as, oh, they're no, they're just alien hybrids. Well, I don't think so. I think it goes way beyond that. I think archons are actually these dark demonic overlords that are so powerful that they don't even spend time as physical beings anymore. They stay in this non-physical, natively astral kind of state. And from what I can tell, based on the abduction accounts, there is a hierarchy within the alien. A lot of these alien factions, they have a hierarchy where at the very, very, very bottom, okay, they might have hybrids. And the hybrids, I guess, to us, they'd be like extraterrestrial because they are basically human. They're not really quantum as much as we are, or as much as, some of these other aliens are. So we got those, and then above that, you've got these ambiterrestrial aliens who can kind of phase in and out between realities. And then above that, you have these ultra-terrestrials that they don't even have bodies really. They're like these energy forms that exist in another dimension that these other lower aliens kind of treat as almost like gods or these
Mhm.
superiors, So right at the cusp, that's where you would find, let's say, the praying mantis type aliens, and then above them is where you would start getting into more of these ultra-terrestrial energy forms, archons, things like that. Now, the interesting thing about that is that if you look into demonology, like the demon phenomenon, which is real. I mean, there are like actual dark beings that we could call demons. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily a Christian phenomenon because you find demonic type beings also within like Islam and native cultures and ancient Babylonian stuff. So Sumerian like demons were a thing a long time ago, right? So these dark humanoid energy forms, they've always existed, but the thing is they also have a hierarchy. And the higher you go up in that hierarchy, the more powerful and physically effective those beings become. And so at the very top of the demonic hierarchy, you have these demonic overlords that are exactly the same as the top of the alien hierarchy, the negative alien hierarchy. So the negative alien hierarchy, you start off as physical aliens at the bottom, you get increasingly less physical as you go up to the top. And the demonic hierarchy, you start off as non-physical at the bottom, like these astral parasites, and then you go up above that, and eventually you get to these powerful demons that can affect physicality itself. So you get this merger at the top of these two separate hierarchies, these negative hierarchies. And so that's why I think these archons are sort of the top of both the negative alien and the demonic hierarchy. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes from within the Christian circles, where they say aliens are demons.
Mhm.
Not necessarily, but there is a relationship between the alien phenomenon and the demonic phenomenon, but it's not like the alien that you get abducted by is exactly the same thing as a demon that might harass you as you're trying to sleep. They're not the same thing. But at the very top, their command structure, I think that there is a definite merger at the top of that pyramid. So extraterrestrials are physical, ambiterrestrials are like variably physical, and ultra-terrestrials are these non-physical, super powerful, almost godlike energy beings that have mastery over space and time.
Right. So, okay.
Yeah,
So there, I've heard that was amazing, by the
that
way.
was that was great.
That
Yeah.
that was incredible. It resonates and it all makes sense. Like there at the top, there would be some archon manipulator, master, puppet master, whatever, it's kind of pulling the strings. And, what about, okay, before I go on to the next thing I was going to ask you, what about the angelic side of this?
The service, there's a service to self and the service to others is the law of one term. So what you described sounded like the service to self negative kind of
Yep.
hierarchy, but there's also a positive one as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so what would you like? How would you describe that? And we hear about these Lyrans and these Pleiadians and all these groups that are essentially benevolent. I mean, everything there's duality within every race, right? But
Mhm.
the benevolent side of all this, where we have the angels and these groups that are here helping us, would they fit into the same hierarchy, that same structure, just of the light?
Essentially, you can have two parallel structures. You can have the service to self, the negative, or the service to others, the positive. And also, at the top of the positive one, at the very, very, very tippy top, of course, that's you would have the infinite divine creator. I mean,
Mhm.
just logically speaking, that's where the trend points to. So you have the infinite creator above that. And then beneath that, you would have, I guess you could call them, instead of archons, it'd be archangels. So archangels, and then angels. And then beneath that, you get these other beings that are, you put them on the level of ambi-terrestrials, essentially. So there are beings that they're okay. So there's two kinds of powerful positive beings. There are ones that come from the top that are emanated by the divine, and they've never had physical incarnations ever. And that's what you would typically find as angels or archangels. They are emanations of the divine that embody different divine archetypes. They're almost like, I don't want to say AI because they do have consciousness, so they're not like artificial consciousnesses, but they are creations, direct creations from the divine that serve a divine function. And then you have other ones that have worked their way up from the bottom. So they could have been humanoid at one point, and then they, transcended physicality. And then they, became increasingly spiritually masterful of their own consciousness and in harmony, in alignment with the divine. And so then they become these divine servants almost. You could almost call them like divine masters in a way. I don't want to use the term ascended masters because that term has really become corrupted within the New Age field, right? But
Very
but they are something like that. They're like so-called ascended masters, and then beneath them, you have like a. It's not a command structure so much as different grades of sophistication. The same way. It's not like a 12th grader commands a fourth grader. That's not how it works.
Right.
It's just there's different levels of development. And so even within the human sphere, okay, like you and me, because we are interested in these topics, we have an orientation that is a little more transcendent versus the average person who's only interested in sports and money and sex and drugs or whatever. Okay. So we're just like a little bit above that. But the thing is, even within the human sphere, there are so many higher levels than even where we are at. And those higher levels, we would call those like saints or positive secret societies, spiritual masters, things like that. People that are still human, but they're starting to approach that threshold of overcoming what it means to be a limited human.
Hmm.
And some of these aborigines who can teleport supposedly,
Hmm.
they're on that level within their culture. But you find the same thing even within Western culture amongst certain Rosicrucians or alchemists, or in the East amongst certain Hindu yogis, or uh, like Taoist yoga or Buddhist
Tibetan
masters,
masters.
Tibetan
Yeah.
masters. Yeah, yeah. So there's a spectrum even within humanity. And so it stands to reason that beyond that spectrum, there is an even higher spectrum that probably continues within the discarnate afterlife astral state, where there are beings that they're not ultra terrestrials yet. They're just non-physical, but they continue their spiritual education and mastery within these afterlife spiritual planes. And from there on, it keeps going higher and higher. So that's like the more positive hierarchy. Now the question is, are there such things as positive aliens as well? Is there a parity between the negative alien spectrum and the positive spectrum? And I would say, sort of, but not necessarily. It's not like there are like positive grays and positive reptilians and positive mantids. I don't think so. But I think, there are physical beings that have advanced technology, that are psychic, that are super intelligent, that are what we would consider benevolent or positive. And the thing is, someone could say, well, they're aliens and they're so smart that there's no way that we can comprehend them. So therefore, there's no way we can say whether they're benevolent or not because we can't even comprehend where they're coming from. And that might be true if we're dealing with some like interdimensional octopus from another galaxy. Maybe at
Right.
that point we can't even comprehend it. But the thing is, these beings, a lot of them are humanoid. They look humanoid. They can
Right.
speak. I mean, they're telepathic, but they can also speak. They've got two eyes. They can breathe our air. They can operate in our environment. So they're not that different. I mean, they're very different, but they're not that different. So we are still able to approximate an understanding of them. And I think the more positive divine ones, they are understandable as such. Now
Right.
the problem is that the negative alien agenda, well, agendas, because there's multiple ones, a lot of that involves deception. In other words, pretending to be good guys, offering Trojan horses, offering false choices, like the hybrid breeding program. There's so many abductees out there that are told, hey, we're trying to integrate humans with gray DNA so that we can take some of your emotions and put them back into our gene pool so we can experience emotions again. That's a baloney story. I don't believe that for a second because grays are Well, they're kind of blameless because they're just task workers. They're not themselves necessarily displaying much autonomy, but they're working for something else. And
Right.
that something else has malevolent intentions. And a lot of those intentions involve deception. So the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of these grays, they they might pretend to be positive aliens, either as themselves or to project the guise of being a Pleiadian or a Lyran or whatever. And so, because of that, we have within the New Age and channeling community a kind of false, disinformative fantasy built up of what positive aliens are like.
I
So there's
agree.
a lot of just a lot of Disney cartoon
Yeah.
style caricatures of positive beings, and the reason you can tell that that is that way is because these so-called positive Pleiadians or whatever, the way that they're portrayed, it's very sappy. It's very it's just dripping in sugar. You know, it's not true divine clarity. It's not. It doesn't like lift up your consciousness. It actually pacifies you. It's like you get a sugar crash from the amount of sweetness that these things are loaded up with in the narratives. And so the thing is, you can look at all that and you can say, okay, well, that's just clearly baloney because these people are being deceived by lying demons or grays or whatever. And therefore, there's no such things as positive aliens. Well, that's a logical fallacy because you could still have positive beings, but they just might not be the ones that are being lauded within the New Age channeling field, which is a caricature of the real thing. So in all my research, okay, I have detected a signature or footprint of genuine positive alien beings, but they're not in the majority, and they are incredibly subtle about their actions. Maybe because of some law of non-interference or something, some prime
That's
directive,
exactly
right?
what I was going to say.
Prime
Yeah.
directive. Yeah.
Yeah. So the prime directive is, you know, in Star Trek. Well, see, the thing is, so Star Trek itself, Gene Roddenberry, he was associated with the channeling community and with
Mhm.
ufology, and he knew abductees and contactees. He got a
Mhm.
lot of information from that, including probably government insiders, and he incorporated some of those ideas into Star Trek. So these Star Trek guys, you know, in the Starfleet uniforms, and that's modeled after the Nordic aliens.
Right. Right.
Okay. So there's a little bit of truth to that, but as I mentioned, the whole New Age channeling field has sort of run away with that and created
Mhm.
this fantasy from it.
Well,
Um,
it's a perfect way to inject false light into the community and counter the ascension. And it's like
Yeah.
a savior complex program where people give their power away to something
Right.
outside themselves, and that's exploited in the unhealed humans, right? Because we're
yeah.
all going through this healing process. So, and I do believe there are genuine channelers that do get
Mhm.
actual benevolent beings coming through them, but I think it's like you said, more subtle. um, it's more subtle because of non-interference, or they don't have a reason to come in here and manipulate things and stir the pot because they understand that we're all on this evolutionary path that's gonna, we're learning lessons, and we're evolving based on our own lessons, and like they're not going to interfere with that because they see the beauty and they see the light in that. So I do believe it's more subtle. And Aaron, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, the one of the best ways you can really tell between what is a either somebody's making it up because there's that too, or it's something a trickster or negative coming through trying to, like you said, pose as a being of light. Is the message more empowering to you to say like you have the power, you're like waking that up within you, or is it more of a savior message of like putting themselves on this pedestal and you're these lowly humans and you need to like worship us and we're coming here to save you and that whole savior um program.
Mhm.
And if you can like if it's more like that, not good, not benevolent. That's
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's that's a that's a simple, more of a
yeah.
simple way to kind of see.
And to your point that they're not much different than us is very accurate because for them
Hmm.
to take the form of the five-star figure, right? The human body, head, arms, legs, mouth, everything, everything we can do means that they operate on the same or very similar belief system as we do. And so we're already close because of our belief system. If we weren't in the same belief system, then we would be that interdimensional octopus that you talked about. So we're already operating within the same laws of the universe based on how we look and how we present ourselves and how we appear to each other, and that's why we can even perceive each other. So yeah, we are a lot more similar than we might think. And I think that's a great point that you brought up.
Yeah, it's like we're similar in that respect, in the sense that it is comprehensible if we really, really try. Well, at least comprehensible through metaphors and so on. But of course, the top of their hierarchy are these ultra-terrestrial energy beings, and maybe those are the ones that are very difficult for us to comprehend because they're not even humanoid. Okay, but they have had to translate their agenda down through different levels that start approaching us. So these aliens, these hybrids that are like the five-star pattern, right? Well, that's what they are. Maybe they were created to interface with us, to manipulate us, and that's why they have that form. Or maybe they look that way simply because they are from other worlds, even other planets, where the human DNA genome thing has been seeded on other worlds. And maybe they've had their own separate history for a million years or whatever. Okay. There's all these different possibilities. Um, but the thing is, some of it's comprehensible and some of it isn't. But even if it isn't, in order for it to even interact with us, it has to be translated through a filter that is understandable to us. So there is an
Right.
element to the alien thing that we can't understand, and therefore we should try. And we can't just say, "Oh no, it's all a nebulous alien phenomenon. We can't comprehend any of it, so let's not even try." That's not a good approach.
Yeah,
No.
I agree.
But
Absolutely. I mean, this is such a fascinating conversation to really, I mean, expand in the way that you have and throughout your research. I mean, this is, I mean, I don't even know what your books, like the books you've written, do they cover this type of subject matter or what are the
Yeah,
books?
yeah. So if you're interested in the alien issue, including what I mentioned, extraterrestrials, ambiterrestrials, ultraterrestrials, the positive versus negative types, how to tell the difference, how to discern between them. And it also gets into what you said, Aaron, about is it empowering or not? That's like it's one of those key metrics.
yeah.
So what is empowerment really, right? Empowerment is increasing your knowledge, your awareness, your free will, your self-determination, your
Hmm.
volition, all those things. And
Yeah.
so if you have a being that is interested in making you more clear, more knowledgeable, more able to discern deception, then typically that tends to be a more positive type of being, right?
Hmm.
Because
Right.
what you normally find with the ones that are pretending to be positive but they're actually negative is that man, they'll tell you the history of the universe. They'll tell you that you yourself, used to be an Atlantean priest or priestess, and they'll play to your ego, and then
Right.
they'll try
Right.
to they'll try to weave you into their false narrative in order to position you beneath them so that they can start controlling you. That's one of the
Right.
key things they do. And they use ego hooks. They use the air of authority. Like oh, we are from this Syrian Star Council, and we've chosen you as our ambassador. That sort of a thing.
Yep.
Um, Whereas the more positive ones, they'll tend to be more anonymous. They'll try to put themselves out, like don't worship us, don't rely on us. We're trying to give you information. We'll try to, and then they'll tend to be more Socratic about their teaching methods, trying to get you
Yep.
to think, and they'll point you to different information sources. So for example, if you have a potential non-human source that leads you towards, let's say, Carla Turner and Eve Lorgan and William Bramley and all these really good books that make you really think,
Mm-hmm.
well, then that source probably is a negative because why would a negative source want to lead you
Right.
towards sources that are counter, disinfo narrative? So, and that sort of
Right.
thing happens. There are these invisible pressures that are pushing people, whether they know it or not, towards finding the right sources, towards becoming more educated, towards speaking on these topics to try to differentiate between, truth and lies. And so that's what I'm talking about, with that invisible positive signature or fingerprint.
Yeah.
That's why I think that something like that exists.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You said the
That's
pressure that's kind of guiding you away or towards stuff, and I found that within my own research. Like there'll be influencers, channelers, books, whatever that people just love and they're raving about, and they never even come into my awareness. And people are like, "Have you never heard that?" And then I'll look into it, and I start getting like a sick feeling in my stomach. I'm like, "Oh, this is the trickster energy." Like,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
but it's like thousands of people have been hooked, and you're like,
Mhm.
"Whoa!" Like. And I'm like, now I understand why this hasn't been like brought to my awareness. I've been actually being protected from this information. And I believe like if you're operating from the heart and doing everything in integrity and just have the best intentions, like you're gonna be divinely protected. And you're gonna be, if you keep a clean enough vessel, there's less chance for manipulation, right? And
Yeah.
obviously, there's always the distractions and there's going to be the attempts, but that's how we learn. So if you can just maintain a clear channel and, a healthy lifestyle, I think you're going to be guided in the right direction and you can kind of steer clear from those traps because they are traps. They're consciousness traps, actually. And, people think that they're striking gold and they've found this like galactic emissary who has all the secrets to the universe and they're sharing, and but it's not empowering actually, and like I truly believe in sometimes, most of the time, it might be the dark. The devil never shows up as the devil, right? The false light is real, and it's part of the story right now because this is a war, a spiritual war, a temporal war, a physical war. 3D, every on all layers right now.
Quantum
Or
more.
quantum, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, we're talking about, things change in the fog of war, and there's no lengths that these groups won't go to save face and save their agenda, and their timelines are collapsing. I mean, this is part of the reality of the situation. So, there's desperate measures in place right now, and I think that all things need to be considered.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's one reason why, because you asked about my books earlier. So one of those books, which I was going to lead into, is it's called Discerning Alien Disinformation, appropriately enough, because
Right.
that's exactly what that book does. And you can find that book on my website for free as an article series, or you can pick it up for cheap on Amazon. So Discerning Alien Disinformation, um, it's got one chapter in there which literally shows you examples of the alien disinfo that is out there. And I counter each point. So I show what it says, I counter it to point out like how wrong it is. And I do that for an entire chapter. And then I go through the different alien types, the disinformation methods. I really, really break it down. And then the final chapter, chapter 6, that's where I go into the nuances of distinguishing between negatives pretending to be positive and potentially authentic positive ones. How can you tell the difference between them? So offer the book as food for thought, not as I'm not trying to like beat it over your head, trying to program you with it. I'm trying to give it as food for thought. So yeah, check out that book and it'll make you think. It'll really make you think about what's out there. And so once you read that book and then you go on the internet and you look at these channeling sources or what abductees or contactees like Ryan Bledsoe are saying, you can look at that and you can say, oh yeah, I recognize that trick. Oh, I know that pattern, and so on, based on this book. So it's a useful book. So check that one out. I have that one. I have Fringe Knowledge for Beginners, which is it's a short, it's a quick read. It's an introduction to all the. I mean, you guys are probably beyond that now, but anyone who's new to the field of awakening, you'll get a kick out of it because it covers the negative, the positive, spiritual, the physical. It covers all of that. It's like a nice all-in-one kind of thing. And then my third book, which came out a couple years ago, it's called Gnosis, Alchemy, Grail, Arc, and the Demiurge. And it is about the influence of alien technology within human history, including ancient times. So I get into the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, alchemy, ancient history, the pyramids, all that stuff. And I show how these things are actually the result of advanced technologies that are not human, and how therefore human history is actually a bit of a chessboard between different and alien and ultra-terrestrial agendas. So that's a pretty fascinating one too.
Yeah, that one actually, I would actually really like to read that one because, the Ark, the Holy Grail. I mean, there's so many theories surrounding all of it. But being a technological device, the Holy Grail I've heard it might be an actual chalice. It could be just representing the holy blood that they drink, and to produce longevity and these extended lifespans because, or even get into adrenochrome, but the Ark of the Covenant, that's something that we've heard over and over be described as a technology. So,
Mhm.
what is your conclusion as far as what the Ark of the Covenant would be?
So the way that I build it up in the book, and I'm going to go on like a little tangent, but I'll come back to it. So in the book, I start out talking about alchemy and what alchemy actually is. And so what alchemy actually is, uh, it's a method of using etheric energies. So subtle energies, life force energy, orgone, chi, prana, whatever you want to call it, using those energies within chemistry in order to create chemical products that are not what you would expect under typical chemical rules because you're operating by these quantum metaphysical subtle energies that alter the laws of physics, and that's how you end up producing the philosopher's stone. And so the philosopher's stone, it's a physical substance, and it's an actual real thing. It's not just a metaphor. I mean, you can interpret alchemy metaphorically like Jung did for psychological spiritual processes, but there is an actual laboratory science to it, okay? And you can produce the Philosopher's Stone, and it does lead to psychic powers, life extension, and other incredible things. But what it is it's a very concentrated form of etheric energy that is imbued into a physical substance. And it is so strong that if you imbibe it, if you take it, it jacks up your own etheric energy field. It's almost like a match lighting a forest on fire. So you're the forest. The Philosopher's Stone is an etheric fire, and you buy part of it and it lights you up etherically, and that's how you get life extension and psychic powers and everything. So the reason why I mention that is because that same science can be taken to a much higher degree within alien technology, or maybe even ancient human technology back when we were another civilization that was super advanced. Okay. But with that technology, you can create physical things that are imbued with an incredibly strong etheric energy field that is so strong that it almost develops like an artificial intelligence. It becomes like a thought form, or what the occultists would call an egregore. Okay, it's a self-contained construct of subtle energies that has its own consciousness. It's like an artificial soul, and you can impregnate that into a physical vessel, like a crystal, or something like that. And I think that is what the so-called tablets of the Ten Commandments that were put into the Ark of the Covenant. That's what it was. And based on my research and the works that I've read of Frank, Joseph, and others, I think there's a lot to be said that the Mount Sinai, which Moses supposedly went up into to commune with God, it wasn't actually Mount Sinai at the very bottom of the Arabian Peninsula. It was the Great Pyramid itself. Because the way that it's described as being three mountains, as being encirclable at the bottom by the troops. I mean, the actual true Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula, it's too huge. You can't put troops around it, but you can put troops around the base of the Great Pyramid. And anyway, they described how Mount Sinai would quake and tremble, and it would glow. Another term for Mount Sinai is Mount Horeb, which means glowing mountain. And back during ancient times, the Great Pyramid was white limestone on the outside, and it would shine like really brightly.
With the
And it would,
capstone as well. Yeah.
yeah, and the capstone as well. And when it was operational, it would create a trembling sound as well as a horn sound. And inside of it, in the king's chamber, I think used to be a power source or some sort of crystal device, which the original Moses brought out and had to store in something because it was a very strong energy field. And so he put it inside the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant itself is just a box. It's like a box covered with gold on the inside and outside with a golden lid. A lot like an orgone accumulator, which is multiple layers of metal and inorganic materials. Anyway, it's a container for a very powerful energy source that had a mind of its own, whether it was a thought form that was occupying it or whether it was a communication device towards some interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial entity or something that became the Lord of Israel. Anyway, so I think that's what the Ark of the Covenant was. I think it was what I call demiurgic technology, which is physical technology that is powered up by etheric and astral subtle energy fields, and that has its own artificial intelligence to it. Now, the reason why this matters is because within ufology, within the UFO field, when they talk about a lot of these UFO ships and vessels, that's pretty much what they are. They are physical things that seem to have an artificial intelligence to them. So they're living things. I mean, semi-living things. Okay, and so when you try to pilot one of these crafts, you're not just moving levers and pushing buttons. You're psychically interfacing with the consciousness of the ship itself in order to teleport or steer or maneuver or so on.
Right.
And so that's what alien technology tends to be. Okay, it tends to be a physical base that has layered atop of it different structured subtle energy fields that perform additional functions on the psychic plane, or maybe on the plane of manipulating matter and energy in space and time itself. So a lot of the stuff in the Old Testament, like for example, the staff that Aaron, which is Moses' brother, had that he was able to do magical things with, a lot of these things, they they overlap with alien technology. They use a similar kind of physics to it. And so that's what I talk about in the book. And I talk about how the Holy Grail probably was the same thing as what was originally in the Ark of the Covenant. It's just, at that point, it was just the crystal by itself, programmed in a different way, because the Grail Knights, they were more in tune with the Christly service to others energy, whereas the the original Jewish, the Hebrew priests, they're more operating by the old patriarchal kind of vengeful. I mean, that's why their god was a big bloodlusty psychopath in the Old Testament, is because that's sort of what they were tapping into. It was a different kind of programming. But that's what I talk about in my Gnosis book. The idea that this kind of alien technology has shown up throughout history, and it has steered history. I mean, the thing, if you think about it, today in the Middle East, the US stands on the cusp of war with Iran because Israel wants us to get into a war with Iran. Okay, they're trying to drag us into a war against Iran, which could kill millions and millions of people. But the only reason that's happening is because Jews exist, and it's only because of ancient times that they were able to survive the desert and the journey and everything because of the Ark of the Covenant, because of alien technology. So there are things that have happened thousands and thousands of years ago that are still in play today. There are agendas, bloodlines, geopolitical things that are still happening nowadays because of events that happened way long ago due to alien technologies and also alien agendas. And so it's a big complicated picture, and I try to map that out within this Gnosis book.
Wow. So, what are your thoughts on the theory that, Revelations was always a planned psychological operation? It was never going to be, it was always a plan. It was never something that was going to naturally occur. And they've manipulated our past and our timelines so that Revelations does occur, does play out to their benefit. What are your thoughts about their
Well, I
meaning,
mean,
like the
yeah,
negative?
yeah. Well, the thing is, there's no doubt about it that there are messianic factions within Christianity and Judaism that want to see those events play out. And they want to see it play out so much that they're willing to make those things happen artificially. Okay, so if Revelation says that an antichrist is going to rise to power, then they're going to manufacture an antichrist just so they can move things along. And even within like Judaism, for example, the Sabbatean Jews, they they believe that in order to bring about the eventual coming of a Messiah, the world has to be corrupted first. Has to be brought to a very dark state. So they freely engage in very dark practices, almost like black magic, uh, sick stuff, in order to create the conditions that would lead to the eventual coming of a Messiah. So what I'm trying to say is, there are these crazy religious forces that are willing to do what it takes to make it happen. So in that case, it is like a blueprint. Even if originally it wasn't designed as a blueprint, I mean, it could have been John of Patmos, tripping on mushrooms for all I know, and he had some crazy vision. But people took it seriously enough that there's been over 2,000 years now, or almost 2,000 years, in order for that vision to be made into reality. So either way, I think it could function more as a blueprint than a prophecy. But the thing is, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, because like what comes first, especially when you consider time travel and ultra terrestrial forces that are beyond time. I mean, for all we know, these agendas are happening now, but the past has been manipulated in order to reinforce it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what if the book of Revelation is ironically enough a living document that is actually being influenced from the future or even from like right now hyperdimensionally in order to create this feedback loop for us, to continually reflect what's happening now and what's going to be happening. These are the kinds of crazy lines of logic you have to go down once you start taking time travel into consideration.
Yeah, and I actually resonate with that explanation. I really do. I just it feels right. There's so many factors that people won't consider because they haven't, they just unfortunately that understanding, that information, that knowledge has been kept from us. Obviously, the occultists, they have it, and but we don't. So like going down those lines of logic, like you said, I really appreciate that, and it makes so much more sense to me. And Aaron, you're kind of glitching out over there. Can you are you still with us?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's glitching out on my end. I don't know why.
Okay.
My connection's unstable too.
Okay. Well, you're
Sorry about
still
that.
with it. You're still here, but you're just like stop animation, Aaron, today. Uh,
Yeah, that's how it looks on my end for everyone. I don't know why it's doing this. Sorry, guys.
so um okay,
I'm
Tom.
trying to
So
see if I can fix it.
Tom, you mentioned this technology having like a 3D level and then components in higher dimensions, essentially,
Mhm.
that operate with it. And I've heard other actually come from a channeler talking about the pyramids and even mountains and some of these ancient structures that we believe were mountains, but they're just actually there's structures like from the far distant past that look like mountains because they've been so eroded and stuff. And either way, the way it's been described is like the pyramid itself is the foundation in the third dimension, but it has other components in other dimensions. And because of that, and that's done intentionally, so that site can be used as a portal site to access the other dimensions. And so if you're talking about a technology within the pyramid that has other layers to it, the pyramid itself would likely have other layers as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, and it's even it's even sadder nowadays because ancient times, its physical base, which is the physical pyramid, it had even more like physical layers to it. It had the machinery inside. It had like levers and chemicals and plasmas and everything like that. So what we see nowadays is like the shell of a physical thing, which itself was only the base of a higher metaphysical thing as well.
Right.
So so as far as like the pyramid goes, though, that is something that I analyzed in my Gnosis book. And one thing I noticed right off the bat is that the structure of the pyramid is modeled after the human form, or at least some sort of humanoid form. So if you look at the cross section of the pyramid, where the heart is, the human heart, it's that part of the cross section. That's where the underground subterranean pumping chamber is that used to pump water up into the pyramid. So it
Okay.
functioned as a heart itself. It was like a ram. It was a ramjet pump, a ram pump. And if you go up higher above that, where the trachea and the lungs are, that's where the grand gallery is. And where the voice box is, that's where the queen's chamber is. And then where the mouth and the teeth and the tongues are, or tongue is, that's where the antechamber is prior to the king's chamber. And the antechamber had these vertical slats that could be raised and lowered to mimic, I think, the position of the tongue and the teeth in order to modulate the sound that was coming from the grand gallery. That had these resonator things in there. And this is something that Christopher Dunn, analyzed in his book, The Giza Power Plant Idea.
Yes.
So the king's chamber itself is almost like the front of the mouth, and the little gables, those little gabled little slats above the king's chamber, those actually correspond to the sinus passages because the sinus passages have several different like folds in them, and those folds correspond perfectly to those cross slats above the king's chamber. So that was like a resonating chamber above it. And then interestingly enough, where the brain is within with the Great Pyramid, that's where the what did they do? Those neutrino detectors detected some sort of big chamber within the Great
Right.
Pyramid. That's where that is. So there's still something there which corresponds to the brain. So maybe that's some sort of hall of records or something that isn't being publicly disclosed. So my theory is that the Great Pyramid and originally it it was filled with probably a hydrogen oxygen plasma that was very hot and very glowing, and resonance was being pumped through it in order to probably create scalar waves, in order to do something that involved the Ark of the Covenant power source that was kept in the King's Chamber. So I think it was either I don't think it was like a power plant. I don't think it was a weapon. I think it was probably something to modify physical reality itself, or Earth itself, maybe shift its axis or stabilize it against a pole shift or um, retune reality to some degree. And I mean, I explain this much better in my book than I can here because
Yeah.
we're kind of limited time. I don't have any diagrams or anything, but yeah, check it out.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fascinating and resonates. And it never occurred to me like it's mimicking the human body, which everything in nature does that already. So it would make
Mhm.
sense that within their structures they would try to mimic that as well, because if they would have some fundamental understanding of that, right? And, as above, so below, like if you look into the human eye, you can see a universe or a galaxy, right? So, I mean, it fits those same principles. And I
Mhm.
think I love that line of thinking. I really appreciate that. So where can people find your books? I think at montauk.net. Is that what it
Yeah.
is?
Yeah. If you go to montauk.net, if you click on books, you can find all the links there. I've got it to lulu.com if you hate Amazon, or I've got it to Amazon. I've got it on Kindle. Now, several of my books are free. You can download it as a PDF or I think even EPUB right off my site. But the Gnosis one, I mean, that took a lot of work. That's like a huge book. So you can get that one on Amazon or Lulu if you want.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Aaron, did you have now that you're back, do you have any thing to say or questions about what he was just saying?
No, man. This was all fascinating. You're a wealth of knowledge and information. So thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. Thank you.
Right. Yeah,
Can't wait to get
absolutely.
your books too. I'm gonna get some of your books as well.
Okay.
Can't
Yeah,
wait to
so,
read them.
likewise. And Tom, did you have anything that you wanted to touch on before we wrap this up?
Yeah, well, so the thing is, these things are not divorced from what's happening nowadays. And just to give you a little a little prelude to that, at Mar-a-Lago, at Trump's home, he's got
Mhm.
like a big replica of the Ark of the Covenant there.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Thank you for
Yeah,
bringing that up, actually. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
and people joke, like, what makes you think it's a replica?
Hmm.
Dun dun dun.
Right.
Hey,
And yeah, it's a joke. It's a joke. But the thing is,
right.
with all the other weird things about Trump, it's only a half joke because there's some weird things going on there. And speaking of timeline wars, we were talking about time wars earlier.
Yeah.
So time wars, they don't necessarily involve like invading UFO fleets, shooting it out, battling over Earth. It's not like that. It's very tiny little things that have huge effects down the line. Because if you have the hindsight of time travel or, just precognition, then you know all the little tiny butterflies to move in order to steer the hurricanes that happen in the future. So for example, the Butler rally with Trump, a simple head turn, couple
Mhm.
inches, and we would have been on a totally different timeline right now. We could be in war with Russia, right now,
Right.
with like nukes going off, a month ago, if that hadn't happened.
Right.
So it's little things like that where it's the smallest forms of intervention that have the biggest outcomes. That's how you figure that's how timeline wars would happen. And
Yeah.
the thing is, we are all to some degree playing part in a time war, even if we don't know it. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you think about maybe putting out a certain social media post, and little do you know, it's going to affect someone who affects someone else, and down the line, someone's going to write a book about it, which has bigger effects down the line. But you decide, you know what? Screw it. I'm not going to do it. But guess what? That little screw it, I'm not going to do it. Maybe that was a telepathic suggestion from an entity that had the ability to view into the future and trace back exactly where the inception point was for that particular future.
Yes.
You're right.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
little things like that. I mean, Christians would call it a spiritual war, and that is correct. It is a spiritual war, but it's also a physical war. It's also a time war. It's also a psychic war that's happening, and a lot
Mhm.
of it is playing out sub rosa. It's playing out beneath the level of conscious threshold, and that's why it is so important to build up your discernment and to distinguish between the kinds of subconscious or irrational impulses that you do have. Because some of these impulses, they're going to guide you towards the truth and discernment and like good people and good sources. And some of them are going to guide you or steer you towards bad things, self-destructive things, things that you're going
Right.
to regret down the line,
Right.
like losing all your money on crypto or something, little things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and you can tell the difference based on what it appeals to. So if it appeals strongly to your shadow wounds, your ego issues, if it tries to play that up, your greed, all your vices, that's probably going to lead you in a negative direction. Whereas if it's going to play on your discernment, love of others, love of truth, curiosity, right, clarity, that sort
Mhm.
of thing, then it's probably going to be positive. I mean, and it's only something that you can build up through experience, through trial and error. But the more contemplative you are, the more you analyze, what's going on within you and what the final effects are, the more observant you are, the more you build up that trial by or error discernment. And so that's why it's so important for people to do more contemplation instead of just browsing social media feeds all day long and getting their brain turned to mush by the constant dopamine hits. It's important to kind of take time for yourself, maybe go for a walk or meditate or do some contemplation in a notebook, which I love to do. To write down your ideas, brainstorm through questions. Just build up this sort of like chew your food. All the things that you're absorbing and experiencing, process it. Think about it.
Yeah.
Turn it into skin, bone, and muscle, meaning the assets of your soul through the things that you contemplate and
Right.
integrate into your being. So that's
That
that's sort
was
of what I recommend to people. Yeah.
that was
Well
beautifully
said.
said.
Beautifully
Beautifully
said.
said. I always say try to create or live a world that looks the exact opposite of what you see on social media. Like I
That's
mean,
good
you
advice.
like you get on there and
Literally.
it's so chaotic, and it might as well be World War III on the internet, you know.
Mhm.
But if you look out your door, look out the window, it doesn't. That's not the reality that you're looking at, right? So you got to just create your own reality with with like everything you just said is absolutely beautiful. And I did want to, I thought of something when you were talking about the timeline wars and going back and like making a subtle adjustment because these groups know of an event that's going to happen in the future. So before it even happens, they make the adjustment, like the Adjustment Bureau.
Mhm.
We interviewed this guy Bradley Loves who um, he's a targeted individual, and his story very much deals with time travel. And he brought up the same point because he never understood why at a specific point in his life he started to become targeted until way down the road when the event horizon happened. That he realized that these corporations or whoever it was he was involved with, they had the ability to go back in time and target him to stop him, try to stop him before he ever became a threat because they knew the threat he would become in the future to whatever their agenda. So it's if people are out there who are targeted and they don't understand why, this could be exactly why. Somebody out there knows what you're capable of and what your potential is, and they will absolutely try to manipulate your reality to steer you away from that trajectory.
Mhm.
So it's just a good point to bring up and remember.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And like so people that are just starting their path of awakening, I noticed a lot of them they will face trials. They'll face their worst trials during the beginning of that process because that is when they know the least, but that's also when they're of the greatest potential. So that's when they're targeted the most. And so if you're one of those people, just watch out. Just watch out for certain people that come at you in very weird, improbable ways that try to push you into a certain belief system that it sort of matches what you're getting into, but there's also something very off about it. And if you really think about it, you can kind of delineate what's off about it. So I've had this happen to myself. So back in 2000, 2002, when I really started getting into researching fake reality and the Matrix and all that, I had some strange people synchronistically come at me, trying to lead me into really paranoid directions. And good thing I saw through it, but I think some people probably wouldn't have seen through it. And I think there's a lot of deception that is out there. So there are forces out there that do try to lead us off the path. And
Mhm.
it's when you first start out that you have to be most careful about that.
That resonates so deeply. The people that's happened to me. I've had
Hmm.
people come into my life, three in particular, that, at one point I did take the bait and I started going down that timeline. And you learn the hard way, and the lesson is beautiful at the end once if you can pull out of it. But that's if you can pull out of it, right? And certain relationships are people. So if they can't, they won't necessarily target you, but they'll work through people around you. They
Hmm.
can send a love interest into your life that they know is going to take you down a path that's going to be completely different than where you would have, that you were going. Where were you going? Where you were going. So another great point. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I mean, I appreciate your research because it sounds like it's not just like you haven't just read the books and done the research and, wrote books. So you've actually experienced it and you've lived it. So you understand it fundamentally, because it's happened to you. And that's what I really appreciate about like the boots on the ground efforts that we are seeing right now. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And this has been absolutely incredible today. I feel like we could talk for hours. But I appreciate you coming and joining us today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Um,
Yeah. Thank you, man.
so is that the only place you want people, montauk.net, or people can follow you on X? Are you anywhere else?
Yeah, I'm on X, I'm also on Telegram, and I'm also on YouTube and Amazon. But yeah, I mean, you can find all the links at the bottom of my website, montauk.net.
Right. Right. Okay, cool. Well, I forgot to put the links in the description. So as soon as this ends, I'm going to throw your links down there for anybody listening and watching this, to where you can find Tom. And we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an absolute pleasure. Guys, please like,
Yes.
subscribe, share this with your friends. Go follow us over on X. Our Patreon link is below if you want some exclusive content there. And we're on all the social media platforms. So we really appreciate that. And you could sign up for our email newsletter on journeytotruth.online, which is also where you can find everything we do, including our conference. If you're interested in participating and joining the conference, you can find all that information there. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here this afternoon. We love you all. We can't do this without you. And I can't wrap this up quite yet because I'm not on the screen to actually end the live stream, but I'll get there in just a second. And okay, everybody, have a great afternoon, evening. We love you. And until next time, good night.
Good night, guys.